my honour to welcome to the lectern a gentleman who's had a very long association in his career with Asia. Christopher Rankle has represented the US government in many diplomatic posts, including Vietnam, Hong Kong, Fiji, Thailand on 2 posts, London and China, and as a related to that is apparently very gifted in languages, speaking quite a range of languages, which always impresses me. Apparently he can speak Vietnamese, Thai, Chinese, French, German and Spanish. Chris has advised many governments, federal, state and local, on a range of issues relating to Asian markets. And he's also a specialist in foreign trip planning and has served the last 7 US presidents in this capacity. Chris is going to be speaking on the legal implications of direct recruitment in Vietnam versus working with licensed local agents. Please welcome Christopher Rankle.
Some of my presentation is going to cover aspects that were covered by Ms. Hong Ha as well. I would have some different observations than her because my experience has been a little bit wider, not so much solely based in the recruiting basis of dealing with the Vietnamese government. I was the first US diplomat in Vietnam and Bill Clinton's special negotiator for Vietnam. And so I've had a much deeper relationship with the government and with the law. Also, I helped here to establish the Intel Scholars Program, which was the program that trained the Intel engineers. There were 5 cohorts that were trained in the United States, selected here in Vietnam, trained in the US. And we helped develop the curriculum for them. So I have an aspect of seeing how the Vietnamese curriculum really compares to international and where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are as well. I've also been involved here in the setup of a standalone private university, Eastern International University, which is located in Binh Nhung, which is the next province over to here in the suburbs of Ho Chi Minh City. So I've been through the process of setup of a university from total greenfield all the way to the point now where last year they graduated their first 4-year graduating class. Interestingly, 98% of the students they graduated all had jobs at graduation. That school teaches 4 different programs: engineering, nursing, business, and economics. And the business program is the biggest program there. The whole program is taught in English, which is very unique in Vietnam. I'm going to be talking about legal implications in terms of working with a recruitment company here, education recruitment company here in Vietnam. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the market itself, about why Vietnam is an interesting place. Vietnam has been very, very successful since 1993 when we established diplomatic relations, US established diplomatic relations, re-established diplomatic relations with Vietnam, in terms of doing a very good job at creating literacy, teaching people how to read, write, and communicate in a way that helps them in terms of employment. And as you'll see here, 98% here down in the lower ages here, and then going up to 82%. And that's because in this recent period, the government has focused on this so strongly, and it's been very, very successful. It's one thing, I have a somewhat different view of the Ministry of Education and Technology. Part of the reason is I'm not Vietnamese and I can say what I want. I would say Moet has done a very good job in literacy. They've done a very good job in some other things. But I can tell you, Moet, especially if you have a private university here, you're going to be battling with Moet all the time. They're not an easy group to deal with. They change the rules oftentimes, and then they'll change them back, and then change them back again. Population. The population here in Vietnam is 95 million, and it's, if you look at the region as a whole, that's quite a large population. Next to Indonesia, which is about 250 million, and the Philippines, which is about 100 million. This is one of the bigger populations out here. The numbers fall off considerably from there. Academic year, September to May. In Vietnam, Moet, the Ministry of Education and Training, is the one that actually issues the license. And there are two licenses you have to have. You have to have a business license to be able to do the recruitment business. And then you also have to have a Moet self-funded education license. And in fact, that requirement never went away. What it did is the bond went away. You've always had to have both of these licenses. And if you're in multiple locations, the license that your business license you have for Ho Chi Minh City, if you're in Da Nang, you still have to have a business license in Da Nang as well. And if you're in Hanoi, you have to have a business license in Hanoi. So if you're in multiple locations, this is something you have to keep in mind. Vietnam is a very young population, and that's one of the reasons why Vietnam right now is so very successful in terms of attracting investment. Because with this young population, young people are not only the people that work, they're the people that consume. And so the more young people you have in your population, the more your economy is going to move in a much quicker way. When you look at Vietnam, you shouldn't only look at it as a one-off, because really Vietnam is not only a great place to attract students to come off to your institution, it's also a great location to deal with this whole area. ASEAN, which is the area shown on the map up above here, has a population of about 600 million people. ASEAN, the Asian Economic Community, the AEC, is a free trade agreement that was created in 2015. It is based on creating a free market, a common market, but not a common currency. So essentially what they did is they looked at the European experience, and they tried to replicate all the good parts of the European economic community, and then stay away from some of the more difficult parts, like the common currency. And since 2015, AEC each year has been creating these rules to try and create more and more of this common market. It's not right here, right now, but it's getting closer and closer all the time. One of the things you also have to look at, I think, in this larger market is, and you'll see it in the next slide as well, is you have to think about who's doing well and in terms of their own economic development, but then how is that economic development affecting their middle class? Because it's the middle class that really spends and wants their students to go off to education outside of Vietnam. Vietnam is the fastest growing middle class of any country in ASEAN. So that's another reason why Vietnam has grown very, very well and is going to continue to grow here in the years ahead. This looks at GDP growth here in countries out in the region. And if you get to a 7% GDP growth rate, that's a very fast growth rate. India and China primarily are the main ones that have been able to hit that. China's number is coming down. We in the US government always really had some suspicions about China's numbers because there's various ways of checking the GDP growth number and when we use those measures, China's number always was a little suspect. And so whether China's number was really 7%, what they told us all along is quite questionable. Here, as you'll see, Vietnam comes in at 6.1. That's what they're doing this year. But that still is a very high GDP growth rate. And it's why this economy right now is continuing to develop so fast. But also important to look is the other chart right here, which you look at how the country is growing in terms of purchasing power parity. And this can allow you to look at how fast they're moving up into the middle class. If you'll see here, Vietnam is the one that's moving the fastest, 10%, over 10% right now. A lot of these other countries started their development much, much earlier, and they're not able to meet that same increase rate. So in looking at countries and deciding which are the good markets right now and which are likely to be the good markets in the future, Vietnam really comes out in terms of statistics in a way that looks very, very positive for all of you. This is a little slide where we've looked at how Vietnam is growing in terms of the students going off to the US. And we just did it to the US because that's the one that's changing here quite quickly. As you can see, Vietnam has very, very quickly moved up the numbers in ranking here, and that growth will still continue, but I think you're going to see a slowdown in growth. There's no specific figure on this yet, but notionally, when we're talking to universities, I've just come from the US, I was talking with various universities on the west coast of the US. Most of them say they are not hitting their international goals in terms of students this year. Part of that is really what I would call a Trump effect. Trump, quite honestly, by his words are important, and by his words he's created concern non-predictability, and because of that, some parents have decided that the U.S. may not be as good a market, and maybe they send their child to Canada or Australia or other places. So we don't expect the growth. We expect there will be a growth figure here in the next year, but we don't think they're going to be able to keep the pace. It's going to be a little bit off here for the next several years until things settle down. In terms of business models, when you're looking at coming into the Vietnam market or the Asian market, there's several business models out there. One of them, and this is where most institutions start, is what I call the jet in, jet out model. And that's, you fly in here, you go to fairs, you may meet with parents, etc. And you try and convince them to send their students off to your institution. This is a good way to learn the market, and I think it's a place to start. But over time, what happens is generally these programs, there's too many starts and stops. There's not the 365 days a year representation here, because you don't have somebody here working for you full-time dealing with all of those students. So we think that's a place to start, but we think it has some real negatives about it for the long run. Then the next model is the representative office. Representative office here is used several different ways. A lot of times people talk to you about representative office. Representative office is a legal term here in Vietnam. It's used legally in Thailand, China, other places as well. And if you are a representative office, you can do certain things, but you're precluded from taking funds, and there are a lot of things put onto you, which actually makes this a very costly model to go into. And furthermore, if you start this, you have to end the representative office to go to the next model. You can't be doing a representative office and then have other models going on at the same time. That's illegal, and you'll get caught by the government here. Another way is the traditional agent, which a lot of companies come out here, they try to jet in, jet out for a while, and then they start trying to build out a agent network. Sometimes they start out and have a very limited number of agents initially, and then over time they'll add more and more agents. It works, and it can actually work fairly well. There are some negatives that I note up here, and also, you know, the problem that you have here, especially if you're not here all the time, is you don't know what your agent's doing when you're not here. And they may be doing things that are not necessarily the things that you would want them to be doing, or that are contrary to what you really set up. And so that brings us to the last thing, which is the hybrid, which we're starting to see more and more of. And it gets around a lot of the negatives in the other earlier business models, and if done in the correct way, can be a very good way to operate here. And also, if you're working with the right sub-agent, it can be a very actually cost-effective way as well, because they're spreading their costs. So you're not paying their whole cost, you're spreading a proportion of their costs, which they are operating with you. And this is something that we've seen more and more companies, institutions move to, because it has a lot of positives for it, both for the institution and ultimately for the agent or the entity here as well. What I'd like to do is move on and talk about some specifics here. I've been dealing in Vietnam. I first came here in 1969 with the U.S. Army. I've been dealing with Vietnam off and on since 1969. For the last 20 years, I've been dealing with either Vietnam or this region, not only for education, also a lot for business. But I've seen a lot of the good things, and quite honestly, I've seen a lot of train wrecks. And I'm amazed oftentimes about what people get into. Here is the do's, and the most important thing that I can say is due diligence. A lot of institutions here get involved with companies where they really didn't do the due diligence. They didn't know how qualified the company was. They didn't ask to see the licenses. They didn't get the checks that you can get done here. And this one, if you don't do the due diligence, if you're lucky, you may have a great relationship and then things may go great for you. But if you're a little bit unlucky, the wheels are going to fall off, and it's going to do that fairly quickly. One of the things also that we think is very, very important is going with an institution that is working with one of the major entities like ISEF or AIRC, because these ones actually can tell you about how that company is to deal with. They can help you on some of the due diligence, although you can't depend totally on them. But they give you a step down the way so you can knock out the ones that are clearly not gonna qualify. We think in terms of dealing with an agent, if you're dealing with an agent that has been in business for less than 5 years, you're probably not going to get that well-trained and well-qualified agent. 5 years or more is the minimum, which we believe is the best. Another thing you have to realize here is that can your agent, if you have your agent or your entity here, can they really represent you all over the country? As a practical matter, and based on my experience, I can tell you most Ho Chi Minh people can't do well in Hanoi, and most Hanoi people can't do well in Ho Chi Minh. They're two different markets, and any Vietnamese knows from your accent, from the way you dress, etc., where you're from. And so you want somebody that can represent you across the whole market. And that may not mean that their owner may be a Ho Chi Minh person or maybe a Hanoi person, but they're going to have people in their organization that are able, that are running their operation in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh, and that really have the experience there and can really fully represent you and your institution. Another thing that I think is very, very important here, and that's really the ability and the knowledge to place stories in the press here. Education is a very popular subject here in the press. There's a lot of press coverage about education. If you have a good story, it's very easy to get it into a good publication here. But you have to be working with somebody that knows how to do that and follows the correct process. It's not just, you know, going out and sending your press release to whoever. You have to know how to get that press release actually in the press, and you have to make sure that if that goes out in some way other than in a newspaper, etc., did you follow the legal process for that? Because the Vietnamese government is very, very strict about this. One of the things about the law in Vietnam that you really need to understand is Vietnam's legal system is totally unlike the US, the Canadian, the Australian, European legal system. In Vietnam, if there is not a law stating you can do something, you can't do it. It's illegal. The law has to be there that says that you can do it, and what's the procedure for you to do that. In the United States, Canada, etc., if there's no law against it, you know, you can do it. But that's not the way the system works here. You have to operate really on that basis. In terms of don'ts, and you'd be surprised how often we see this. A lot of institutions come on out here and maybe they hire an interpreter or somebody has a friend or a student who went to their institution who wants to work for them. And so they go ahead and they hire this person to work with them. It's against the law. And unless, in Vietnam, unless you have an agreement, and unless you have a legal company, and unless that legal company has the proper licenses, you cannot have Jenny be sitting on her couch sending out things, dealing with students that are going to be coming to your institution. It's against the law, and eventually you'll be caught for it. MOAT actively looks for this. The tax authorities look for this. The Communist Party here looks for us because they're looking for these things, these anomalies like this. So you have to have an employment contract for anything in terms of work beyond 3 months. That's the legal requirements. Under 3 months, then you can go ahead and do it without a written legal agreement. There also has to be a local entity for any employment. So the individual can't just say, okay, I'm representing this institution. Unless they have a company and there's a legal entity, that's not allowed. Also, Vietnam law requires that employers and employees pay into the Social Security system. Individuals cannot pay into the Social Security system on their own. There has to be an entity there for this. So unless you're following this, ultimately you're illegal and you will in fact get in trouble for this. this provision actually is not dissimilar from places like Thailand and China and other places that I've worked. It's pretty much the system everywhere. So if you want to have this person representing you, they have to set up a Vietnam business entity. That business entity has to have the proper licenses. There has to be a legal agreement, a written legal agreement between your institution and that entity. And ultimately, you want to make sure that that entity is owned by the person that you you're dealing with. In one case, I was involved in trying to straighten out something where somebody came out here. They thought, okay, if we don't sign any agreement, then it's their word against ours, and our brand is protected. And so they had this local person who was a friend of theirs open up a company, and they gave her signatory rights for this whole thing. They were moving money in and out, but they didn't declare it as employment. And they were just paying them directly. There was no withholding going on for Social Security or for the correct taxes, etc. And now that institution is in a situation where they have to basically close that whole entity down and then recreate a new one. They wanted to create the new one while they had the old one and everything, but that's not possible. You have to close the whole thing down and then basically settle your problems, and then you can create the new entity, which in fact meets the regulation. In looking at this, one of the things I think a lot of institutions are not thinking about, and I think part of the problem is oftentimes the person that comes out here is from the recruitment side, and they're not involved in the risk management side of the university. If you look at the risk versus the reward here, I think it's very, very clear that why would you want to take this risk to save a little bit of money when ultimately what can happen is you end up in the newspapers and you're effectively barred from recruiting in this country, and that ends up in the pie or somewhere else like this. So I think if you look at the risk reward in this whole thing, the risk is clearly the dominant factor here, and I think if it's looked at in that way, then I think most institutions would come away and say, well, yeah, let's do it the right way. Let's follow the procedures so we make sure that there's no problem down the line here. My rule here is always deal with an experienced agent. Make sure they have the authorized agreements that they're supposed to have. Do your due diligence and manage them effectively so that you know what they're ultimately doing. And if you do that, this is not a hard place to work in. And it's a place that you can be very, very successful because this is a market that's going to continue to grow. This is our website, businessinasia.com. We've had this website for 20 years. Everything on there, all the information is free. We believe that the best consumer is a educated consumer. So there's a lot of information on there. You can get in touch with either me or my wife, who runs the company with me. both of us have been deeply involved in education and deeply involved in Vietnam for years. As I said, Business Asia is about a 20-year-old company. And I've actually worked for Vietnamese companies. One of them is the largest industrial park operator, the largest infrastructure company, one of the largest real estate companies, and they're the ones that we helped create this university for. And I've worked for them for 10 years. I still work for them. So if you have questions, please send us an email. I'll be happy to give you an answer. I'm often here. I helped create Access American Education. We're looking at doing some expansion with some other countries in terms of the region. Ken is here all the time. He knows where I'm at and can get a hold of me. So what I'd like to do is just end there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. The information I've given here, this is information where we checked with multiple lawyers. I'm a lawyer by training. I actually worked for the White House for President Gerald Ford as his Deputy General Counsel. I don't practice law anymore, but this is, we checked this out with multiple lawyers here. We also talked to MOIT, we talked to the tax authorities, and we're very satisfied that the information here is the correct information. So you'll hear a lot of things out here from people who really haven't done the research and only have a partial exposure to the issue itself. But this information we believe is very correct, and we think if you follow it, you'll be happy you did.
Chris, I have one question. Are you okay if we make a PDF copy of that available to all the participants? So, in about 1 week, we'll send you a link to access all of the seminar presentations from today, including Christopher's. Any other questions? We do have time for a few questions. Please feel free.
Can you go over the payment from outside the U.S., outside Vietnam to inside Vietnam with a local, unlicensed employee again?
Well, if you send money into this country, the money comes in electronic funds transfer through a bank, etc. It goes into a bank account. If that is an occasional thing, the bank notes it, reports it to the government, and there's generally no issue with that. If that starts becoming repetitive, then the bank flags that to the government. They flag it both to the tax authorities and they flag it to the police authorities. And the reason is Vietnam has always believed that America was trying to destabilize or do certain things out here. They always felt the CIA was more effective than the CIA really is. I can tell you, having dealt with them quite a bit. And so they've always had this feeling that anybody that is sending money in here in a repetitive way, that maybe that could be a sign that they're engaged in information gathering or other processes that are against state interests in Vietnam. So if those payments are coming in repetitively, they will be flagged, and sooner or later you'll get a knock on the door, and it won't just be the tax authorities, it'll be the police authorities as well.
I have a question here. We're from Sino-British College, Shanghai, and because it's my first time to come to Vietnam anyway.
Yeah.
And then before we came, I went to Bank of China to try to get some Vietnamese notes. We cannot. We only can get like US dollars and come over to China,
Right.
you know, to get it. And so basically, if we sign up some Vietnamese agents, we need to pay commission over. Do you think that would be an issue?
No, but if you're paying commission for them, the question is do they have an entity? Do they have a company here in Vietnam?
Yeah.
And does that company have the correct licenses, both the business license and the MOIT license? And then what you want to make sure is, okay, the bank information that they're giving you, is that the same as their license, both of their licenses? Because what often happens is they give you the two licenses, but then they say, send it into this bank account, and it's in the name of an individual.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's,
No back.
Yeah. We couldn't send any money to individual bank account anyway.
No.
Yeah, so we only can send it to the company bank account anyway.
right.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons the government does this is they require a VAT payment, value-added tax payment,
Yes.
that goes against the company for this. So
Okay.
people will try and get around it by having it come into their private account.
Yeah.
And they think that they'll be able to get away with it for long enough, and then, you know, they can do whatever.
Because regards to that VAT payment, the Chinese government have that kind of policy
Right.
as well. We send any money abroad,
Right.
we need to pay some VAT payment.
Right.
It's 11% on the top of the commission we pay.
Yeah.
So if we pay that 11% to the Chinese government, does our agent still need to pay something to the Vietnamese?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
thank
And
you.
it's the agent that has to pay, not the institution for
Correct.
the Vietnamese market, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So in the scenario that you're painting there, the real liability is with the agent, not with us paying the agent, right?
Well, the liability is to the agent, but your institution then goes on their quote, your blacklist.
I get it. Okay.
And so it's not only you won't be put in jail, but they'll say, they'll come, you might end up in the newspaper.
Right.
And also they can totally say, okay, this organization cannot recruit in Vietnam at this time. MOIT has that provision in there. They haven't used it a lot, but right now, Ms. Hong Ha was talking about this new system that's coming into effect. This new system has been coming in effect for 2 years, and in Vietnam, the way decision making works is it takes a long time of sort of meeting together, meeting until they come to consensus, and then finally the thing will be issued. In this case, they haven't been able to get the consensus, and so that's why this thing has been much slower than that it comes out. So, but the government does want. They see this whole issue of educational recruitment as a possible black eye, that bad stories could come in the paper that the MOIT, the government is not protecting Vietnamese nationals by having the right sort of procedures, et cetera. And so they're going ahead and dealing with the Vietnamese entity on this, but they also have in the draft regulations that it can be go against the institution as well, the foreign institution. And in that case, I can tell you, having spent 30 years as a diplomat, very little the embassy can do for you. It doesn't matter if you're in the Canadian embassy, the Chinese embassy, or the US embassy. If you get on that list and everything, generally you're going to have to work your way off of that list. The government really has no real effect there.
Any final question? Final question? Okay. So, Christopher, that was extremely well researched and well presented presentation. Thanks very much. So please join me in so we will have a refreshment break until 5:30, and we'll be recommencing seminars at 5:30. Thanks very much.